Tons of news to talk about today, including a whole bunch of deals. As we about to approach Prime Day, we're seeing a lot of competing offers from other companies, including like this 4070 dropping down to $499.99 once you factor in the sale promo codes and such. We're also getting some new 50 series rumors and leaks. We're getting AMD releasing a whole bunch of more performance information about their upcoming 9000 series of processors. I've got a lot to say about that. They're also giving us a bunch of updated information about their AI 300 series mobile chips and their performance and gaming performance, and a whole lot more. Let's pop back in and start out with the deals section today. So as I mentioned at the start, I'm seeing the lowest price I've ever seen for a new RTX 4070. And again, with this promo code hitting $499.99, I'll probably include a comment where I link to today's deals that I mentioned if you are interested. However, if you're considering this option competing with it from AMD is also something very interesting to take a look at. With this 7900 GRE, with an additional $10 off promo code, that hits $509.99. So it's only $10 more than that RTX 4070. And the 7900 GRE is very interesting up against the RTX 4070, and I've talked about that a lot in recent videos. I even just did my monthly GPU buying guide where I went into that. But basically more raw performance and VRAM on the 7900 GRE, but NVIDIA feature set and whatnot on the 4070. But again, those are both really interesting deals at that $500 price point. Also, we're seeing AMD's 7900 XT dropping down to $650. This makes it a lot more interesting than it used to be. And it's still more expensive than a 4070 Super, but is certainly worth considering at this price point. There's not a lot priced really the same as this, so if $650 was your max budget, on a GPU, this could be pretty interesting. We're also seeing AMD's 16GB RX 6800 down to $340, and this thing gets a lot more performance than something like a 4060 Ti, especially given that's priced similarly to the 8GB version, actually less than the 8GB 4060 Ti. For a lot more performance, this is pretty interesting. And we're also seeing AMD's 6750 XT, which is a 12GB graphics card with a lot of performance for 1080p and 1440p, hitting $279.99 at Newegg. So Newegg is coming in hard in front of Prime Day with a bunch of GPU price drops, and a lot of people might be able to find something in the price range they're looking at. Also, I'm going to be looking at monitor deals. The one that popped up to me this morning that seemed interesting is the ultra-wide 34-inch QD OLED AW3423DWF, which I'm currently sitting in front of right now as I film this video. I do like this monitor quite a bit, and we are seeing the price coming down on this thing. However, probably over, tomorrow when Prime Day starts, I'll do a whole separate video on my best Prime Day deals that I can find. So do stay tuned for that in case we see anything better or more interesting. Now, let's get into some of the 50 series leaks and rumors, because that's what you do when you hit this, time of year. Well, so the latest thing is that the Seasonic power supply company has a list of how much GPU power is used by different graphics cards, but that list was just updated to include cards like the RTX 5090. But don't necessarily assume this has to be true. It is certainly possible that Seasonic has information ahead of time from NVIDIA about what to expect, to be able to have their power supplies ready to go. But it's also possible that they're just making educated guesses based on prior, series. Now, Tom's Hardware has summarized some of the more interesting ones because they did list pretty much the whole 50 series here, saying that, and they also helpfully tabulated it up against the 40 series, so you can compare their TDP values. Here, I'll become the point. Anyway, the 5090, they're listing at 500 watts. The 4090 was listed at 450. They're saying the 5080 could be a 350 watt GPU compared to the 320 watt 4080. They're saying the 5070 could be 220 watts instead of the 200 watt 4070. And they're saying the 5060 could be a 170 watt GPU as opposed to the 4060 at 115. And they're also listing a 5050 at 100 watts. Notice we never got an RTX 4050, and this 100 watt is closer to what the 4060 would be. So again, this is all just, could be just utter guesswork by Seasonic, so don't read way too much into this. But for a little bit of fun speculation, notice that the 5060, that big power increase, could this mean that we actually get a reasonable 60 class graphics card out of the 50 series? I think that's what everybody wants. We want a major step up in performance at about that same $300-ish price point from the 60 series. It would also be really nice if it had more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM. And a lot of people accuse the 4060 of being a GPU that really should have been called a 4050, and that we never really got a true 4060, or maybe like the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte is what should have been a 4060, right? So maybe this points to NVIDIA correcting that issue in the mainstream product stack, but again, this could also be utter nonsense. Now, off of these same listings, I'm seeing WCCF Tech reporting. By the way, all my sources will be in the video description. Seasonic is pointing out that, WCCF Tech is pointing out that Seasonic didn't just list 50 series cards. It also listed some new AMD cards in the 7000 series, but not cards that we actually have. They have a 7990 XTX, a 7950 XTX, and a 7950 XT listed. Now that's pretty interesting. AMD has updated, the 50 versions, so minor updates, maybe fast, like with the 6000 series, the 6900 XT got an update to a 6950 XT that had faster memory, right? So this is certainly a realistic thing that AMD could very well be considering doing. But there's, again, absolutely no guarantee that this is based on anything other than somebody at Seasonic just making some guesses to put in their database on stuff that we might expect. But that also doesn't mean that it won't happen, because I do want to mention that a lot of times, even if some of the leaks and rumors don't end up actually coming out to reality, so it feels like, oh, they must have been just making things up. This is an interesting headline that proves a point, which is that, sure, I'm sure some leaks and rumors are just people making crap up. But there are also people who get information ahead of time about products that are legitimately being considered and might even have prototype samples available and being tested, but that just the companies choose not to end up actually producing those and selling them in that factor. So back with the 40 series, there were rumors of an RTX 4070 at 10 gigabytes. And that never happened, right? We ended up getting a RTX 4070 as a 12 gigabyte card. However, this is really interesting. At videocards.com, they're reporting that somebody is selling a 4070 engineering sample prototype for a Founders Edition card that has not only more CUDA cores than the actual 4070, matching the 4070 Super, but with 10 gigabytes of VRAM and a cut down memory bus. So that's really interesting, I think, to take a look at that. And so how this actually stacks up against what we ended up getting is if we look at it up against the 4070 we got a 12 gigabyte card with 5,888 CUDA cores. Whereas this rumored version had 7,168 CUDA cores and 10 gigabytes of memory because it was cut down to 160-bit bus, all once again become the point, versus the 192 bus we actually got, although it had a higher base clock. Our 4070 Super ended up actually getting the 7,168 CUDA cores, but also having the 192-bit bus, enabling them to go with the 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So it seems like originally they were kind of considering this kind of weird hybrid where it would have been like as fast as a 4070 Super potentially, other than the cut down memory bus and VRAM. So with 12 gigabytes of VRAM already being kind of borderline, I'm certainly happy they went with 12 instead of 10, although maybe it would have been nice if we just got the 4070 Super initially as the 4070. I think that would have made a lot more sense initially in general. Now, last bit of 50 series rumors is that apparently, at least according to Hongxing 2020 on Twitter, the next gen 90D will be ready in the first month of 2025, January of 2025. Now, what would that be referring to? That would be referring to a 5090D. If you're like, what is the D? Well, in late last year, NVIDIA, or was it early this year? I can't keep the date straight at this point, but NVIDIA gave China the D version of the RTX 4090 because of restrictions the US places on, AI capable hardware and things like that, not being too powerful to be shipped to China. So they shipped a different version of the 4090 that was compatible with those regulations. So it's looking like there could be a 5090D as well being planned. We don't have a lot of information on what exactly that would look like. The 4090D was only cut down a little bit compared to the 4090. But what I'm confused about here is if there's no change to the regulations on how powerful the GPU can be, how do they get something more powerful than the 4090D but still fit within those regulations? I don't know, because it's about cutting down the compute performance. Maybe there's a way to keep the gaming performance increasing while not increasing the compute performance for AI. I don't know, it's all leaks and rumors anyway. But something that isn't leaks and rumors is AMD's first-party published official further information about the 9000 series. Now, the first thing that they confirmed is the July 31st release date that had been rumored. So we are absolutely getting the 9000 series on July 31st. We still don't have access to what the review embargo date would be, but it's generally either the same day things launch or one day prior. So it would be most likely either July 30th or 31st for when we will get reviews. Now, we're definitely going to want third-party reviews on this stuff because I have so many questions about the things AMD seems to be saying here. Because they're giving us this chart showing the 9700X not paired up against the 7800X3D, but against the previous generation 5800X3D, so previous to the 7000 series, right? So 2 generations back. And they're claiming a 12% faster geomean versus the 5800X3D in this specific set of games. But what's kind of confusing here is that people who actually spoke to AMD about this presentation were told, and like here's one example of this, but I also saw the same thing actually quoted on the thumbnail of the Hardware Unboxed video on this topic, that AMD says the 9700X is faster than the 7800X3D in gaming. And again, we're getting Mark Campbell saying AMD did confirm at the event that the 9700X is about 2% faster than the 7800X3D in the same tests. But this just doesn't make any sense when you look at the claim that it's about 12% faster than the 5800X3D. Because, for example, if I blind you with a white background here, if I pull up Tech Power Up, CPU reviews with pretty recent data, and look at the 5800X3D. So in their test suite, they see the 5800X3D hitting 213.1 frames per second. So if we increased that frame rate by 12%, you could multiply by 1.12 to get a 12% performance increase. Then what we get is 238.672. So let's call that 239, or maybe just call it 240 frames per second. So we would expect, if it ends up being true, that the 12% performance increase is accurate. Then if we took Tech Power Up's chart here and found CPUs that were delivering around 240 frames per second, we would be right around here. So this would put us kind of between a 14600K and a 13700K in gaming performance. But notice that's putting it just, that would put it really close to the 14600K, a little bit past the 7700X. But you know where it puts it? Vastly behind the 7800X 3D, which is at the absolute top of the charts here at 266.3 frames per second. So something doesn't make sense. Now, the biggest way that both things could somehow be true is if AMD's test suite of games here is somehow just reacting kind of strangely to 3D V-cache compared to what we see in the other chips here. But also, even if that's the case, it's then the other games, that other reviewers used. Because even if this is the case, though, it's strange that the 9700X could be 12% faster than a 5800X 3D, but then also be 2% faster than the 7800X 3D, when the 7800X 3D is a lot more than 12% faster than a 5800X 3D. Now, this is Tech Power Up's data that I'm looking at here, but I also took a look over at the Hardware Unboxed video to see what they had to say about this. And they looked at their test suite of games and their most recent testing and noticed exactly the same thing, which is there is more than a 12% gap between the 7800X 3D and the 5800X 3D in their testing as well, which means that how is it possible for the 9700X to be both faster than a 7800X 3D, but also only 12% faster on average than the 9700X in the same test suite of games, unless somehow this specific set of games just cripples the 7800X 3D for some weird reason. But again, different reviewers use different game sets. And anyway, long story short, here's some information, but it's coming from AMD, and something seems really strange about what they're saying. So we definitely want third-party reviews. Now, they also have some additional slides available here that are pretty interesting to look at, talking about their other CPUs. They have the, I'm absolutely tiny now. They have the 9900X paired against the 14900K, and they're talking about both productivity and gaming performance. But notice the games list that they're showing here is smaller than what they were showing in those other slides. So again, just beware that, like, let's say you took a bigger chart of games, like, for example, a chart more like this size, right? And you can see that different CPUs perform differently relative to each other in different games. So, for example, if you had a chart like this one, but compared against the Intel competition, and then you just chose to cut it off right here and only show this section of it, it will look like you're doing much better than the actual larger data set would truly reveal. So it's curious, whether or not that's happening here. And again, that's why you have to be careful of first-party published results. So here's some information, but it's from AMD, so it's obviously to be taken with a grain of salt. Now, the other thing that's interesting is the productivity tests that they use here, showing against the 14900K. Not only could you do the same thing where you cut certain ones off, it actually seems like they're definitely doing that when you look at their other CPUs. Because if you jump to the 9700X, which they compare against the 14700K, notice that the productivity suite has changed some of the tests. Specifically, notice 7-zip is here. And if I switch back to the 9900X, notice there's no 7-zip, but we do have, I don't even know how you'd pronounce that. Procyon Office, Procyon, probably Procyon. No, they have Procyon. Which one do they switch out here? They got rid of Blender. So Blender would be more multi-core focused, and 7-zip is more single-thread focused. So when they go from their 9900X, which has a lot of cores and threads, they're highlighting more multi-thread performance results here with Blender. Whereas when you then switch over to the 9700X, which has fewer cores, they throw in something like 7-zip and remove Blender, where, again, I'm just trying to get at that here's some useful information, but it's first-party results, so it's going to be cherry-picked, and I'm showing you specific instances of it being cherry-picked. I'm not saying AMD's doing anything wrong, that's how marketing works, but be aware these are marketing slides from AMD. Anyway, 9600X, we're seeing similar stuff against the 14600K. Again, notice the 7-zip inclusion and the absence of Blender, indicating again that they are picking which tests to show in these slides. So again, the gaming performance looks good as well, but again, what games are they choosing not to show? Which is really where that all that kind of stuff comes in. Now, where are they getting this kind of performance jumps from? Let's dive a little bit further into some of these slides here. So let me zoom out a bit here. So some interesting information where AMD compares against themselves is talking about the fact that they've become more power efficient. So a lot of these models, if you look at their TDPs, which is their thermal design power, which is not the same thing as the amount of watts they actually use, which is weird because they measure it in watts, and this often confuses me, but anyway. They're showing their 7000 series against their 9000 series. And they're showing that while the Ryzen 9 16-core part is still a 170-watt TDP, they're showing that their 12-core part has been reduced to 120 watts instead of the previous generation's 170 watts. And they're also reducing the power on the 8-core and 6-core models significantly as well. And they're showing that while they do that, they're still reaching higher performance. This is specifically looking at Blender with multi-threading performance. So they're showing that they're delivering increased performance at a lower power target. And they're also showing off that part of this is due to a thermal resistance improvement, allowing them to also get a temperature reduction at the same TDP. So, because again, lower temperatures means oftentimes, that things can boost more. And that would also be especially interesting if you go into precision boost overdrive mode. So they're showing off their PBO enabled results, which seem to be particularly good on the 9700X, showing a 15% performance increase by enabling PBO. Now, is this still Blender multi-threading? Possibly, and they're showing 6% results on the 9900X. They are saying multi-threaded workloads here. And 9900X and 9600X showing that a 6% increase by enabling PBO. So basically, the way I'm reading these these three charts is basically saying that by lowering the TDP and getting this improved thermal resistance, it should increase kind of that, I don't know if overclocking is the right word, but additional boosting when the boosting is more unlocked, additional boosting headroom compared to the previous generation of products. So that could be pretty interesting. Now, the other slide I found particularly useful out of this whole new AMD info dump was the motherboard information. So we're getting additional information about the 800 series chipset families. Now, keep in mind that this is still on the same socket as the previous generation motherboards. So if you bought one of the older gen motherboards, it should still be compatible with a BIOS update. But it looks like the 800 series motherboards are going to provide a lot of good options here. I don't feel like you need to read through this chart. You can pause here if you're super interested in seeing the differences. The lowest addition here with the B840, notice that there's no CPU overclocking, just memory only. And you do get some significantly cut down USB performance, and PCIe only down to Gen 3. So the big differences are kind of USB speeds go up as you get the higher end motherboards. The PCIe slots get to be more advanced, as well as sometimes more of them on the Gen 5. Like graphics and NVMe versus just the NVMe, and the graphics is optional. So that's the kind of thing that we're seeing here on those. Now, if you're interested in seeing some world record overclocking, you could check out Gamers Nexus. And I think some other channels and written sites had similar information available as well, where they saw AMD's overclocking team playing around with some liquid nitrogen and breaking some world records. with the new 9950X CPU, so that's pretty interesting to take a look at. Now, in other AMD information here, this one's not talking about the 9000 series desktop CPUs, but now we're moving on to their new mobile lineup with their Ryzen AI 300 series processors. Now, this is pretty interesting, where we're getting some gaming performance results up against the Intel Core Ultra 9 185H, which, keep in mind that around the time we'll be getting these AI 300 series processors from AMD, we'll probably also be getting an updated 200 series lineup from Intel. So, make of that what you will, but they're also showing the Snapdragon X Elite. However, notice that in a bunch of their tests, they're highlighting the fact that the Snapdragon X Elite just failed to run the game. So, and while sure, AMD is probably intentionally choosing some places to highlight that for marketing purposes. If you look at actual reviews of the Snapdragon X Elite laptops for gaming, that's not at all unreasonable to point out. Their gaming performance and support is not at all ideal right now. But up against Intel's Core Ultra 9 185H, they're showing a bunch of results ranging from 27% faster all the way up to 65% faster in Cyberpunk. So making some pretty big claims there on those. We get some other charts here as well, including talking about productivity, where we see, again, the same deal, where the Snapdragon X Elite and Intel Core Ultra 9 185H are stacked up against the AI 9HX. And again, they're showing results where the AMD one wins. Again, were there other results where they didn't and that just aren't included on the marketing slide? Who knows? Possibly yes, possibly no. Now, overall, what I think is really interesting is looking at the graphics performance update, because my understanding is that these will have RDNA 3.5 architecture on the GPUs, as opposed to RDNA 3, which we've seen on the previous generation of APUs. And they're claiming up to 32% higher performance per watt. Now, I'm going to make sure, again, when reading marketing slides, that I highlight where the marketing language can be misleading. Notice the words up to. This does not say 32% average higher performance per watt. This says up to, so that is a best case scenario. However, they are showing that it is in 3D Mark TimeSpy, which is a pretty standard benchmarking result. So they do seem to be showing that at 15 watts, when they're both set to 15 watts, they do get 32% increased performance per watt. So 32% more performance at the same 15 watt setting. They're also showing 19% increase when running 3D Mark Night Raid. So again, up to 32%, but they're showing one of the other results at 19%. But what is the average when actually running a big set of games? Who knows? But that's what we're getting out of these marketing slides. We're also getting some additional productivity slides here for content creation type stuff, where they're showing up to, for 3D rendering in Blender, something like 3.8 times the performance when compared to Intel's Core Ultra 9. And again, they're showing off leading the pack in this as well. So we got a ton of information here, but again, it's AMD's own marketing slides, so take that for what it is. Now, the last thing I'll throw in here is that Intel is apparently, like I said, not just apparently, but Intel will be coming out with their next-gen series of desktop CPUs. And we're seeing this slide from Jakin on Twitter. And Jakin has been the source of a ton of Arrow Lake CPU information recently. And so he's giving us this chart. Now, it doesn't have specific model number SKUs attached to it, but it's kind of showing some of the, I believe we would read this as P cores, E cores, and GPU cores. Those are the XE cores on the breakdowns between the Core Ultra 9s, the Ultra 7s, and the Ultra 5s. And how all of these would break out. So you see that many of them have, up to 4 GPU cores, but not all of them. Another way of looking at this information plus other information that's been leaked previously is a videocards.com article on this leak has tried to break this down into again, unofficial, this is rumored, and a lot of these naming schemes are either unknown or just kind of going off leaks and rumors, and possibly Intel hasn't even officially like decided on that yet, right? You could decide that up till pretty near to launch. But this at least gets us, I think, a good look at, okay, what are the cores and threads configurations versus the ARC integrated GPU cores, whether they have them and whether it's 3 or 2 XE cores. So this is another way to break down that information. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. There was a ton of information, and again, lots of interesting deals coming up. And like I said, I'm pretty sure Prime Day is starting tomorrow, and expect some deal roundup videos from me if you're interested in what I think are the best deals available, both from Amazon themselves and, like I said, a lot of competing retailers have sales around the same time period in order to compete and kind of double down on everybody talking about the deals available. Hopefully you guys found the video useful and or interesting. Huge thank you to viewers, subscribers, commenters, channel members who have clicked the join button to directly support the channel financially. That's absolutely huge for those of you who can do it. You get membership badges on your comments. It's easier for me to see the comments, and you get early access to some videos. For example, I'm probably going to be pretty busy coming up soon, so I'm trying to put out some get some content ready to post while I'm busy doing other things. But members will get access to that content as soon as I've got it ready. There's already at least one video up right now as of the time of publishing this video, so that could be pretty cool to take a look at. Anyway, hope all of you have an excellent day.